Welcome to the deep dive. You know, when we think about where civilization really kicked off, especially ancient Egypt, we almost always picture the Nile Valley, right? The
Yeah.
fertile strip, the pyramids, the predictable river.
That's the classic image, absolutely. The idea that the Nile's stability, the floods, the easy farming, that's where it all began.
Yeah, the foundation for kingship, complex religion, writing, the whole package.
But, well, that story, as powerful as it is, seems to be missing a huge piece. Maybe even the foundational piece.
Okay, so what are we diving into today then? What's the missing piece?
We need to rewind, way back, thousands of years before the first pharaohs. And we need to look west, hundreds of kilometers west, actually, into what's now the Sahara Desert.
The Sahara, but that's, well, empty now.
Now, yes, but not then. Our sources today suggest that the core ideas, the actual blueprints for pharaonic Egypt, we're talking their gods, their view of the cosmos, kingship, even medicine, weren't cooked up along the Nile at all.
So you're saying they came from the desert? When it wasn't desert?
Exactly. They were formulated much earlier under really intense environmental pressure by surprisingly sophisticated communities living in the Western Desert during a time when it was actually green and, well, wetter.
Wow. Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that evidence. We're talking about a massive cultural transfer from the desert to the Nile.
That's the core idea. We're going to trace how concepts like sacred cattle, detailed astronomy, the image of the king conquering chaos, even how they imagined the earth and sky.
And medicine, too, you mentioned.
And even the very beginnings of professional medicine, it all seems to trace back to these pre-dynastic desert cultures. It's quite a journey.
All right, let's map it out for everyone. Where do we start?
We'll begin at Nabta Playa and Bir Kasaiba. These are key sites in the Western Desert. We need to look at the controversial evidence for early cattle herding there and the truly mind-blowing evidence for ancient astronomy.
Okay, Nabta Playa, astronomy, got it.
Yeah.
Then where?
Then we'll follow the ideas south and east towards the Gilf Kebir Plateau. The rock art there is just incredible. It seems to show the earliest versions of Egyptian kingship ideas, their mythology.
Like visual blueprints.
Precisely. Visual blueprints that migrated with the people towards the Nile as the climate changed. And finally, we'll track how the role of the healer transformed from, a tribal shaman dealing with spirits
To something more structured.
to the specialized priests of the goddess Sekhmet, who were basically doing public health inspections, and in doing so became arguably the first professional doctors.
From desert survival to state medicine. Okay, I'm hooked. Let's start with the environment itself. This green Sahara, how did that even happen?
Right, you really have to reset your mental image of the Sahara. We're talking about a major climate event called the African Humid Period, or sometimes the Neolithic Pluvial. It really gets going around 8500 BC.
And this wasn't just like a few rainy seasons?
Oh no, this was fundamental. It was
Yeah.
driven by a big shift in the Earth's climate systems. The main player is something called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, the ITCZ, basically the planet's rain belt.
Okay.
And that rain belt shifted north, significantly north, by maybe 250 to 550 kilometers further north than it is today.
And that's enough to green the Sahara.
It was enough to change it from hyper-arid, like it is now, to semi-arid. Think grasslands, maybe scattered trees, seasonal water sources, not exactly lush rainforest, but habitable.
So these depressions in the landscape, they started holding water.
Exactly. Places like Nabta Playa, Bir Kasaiba, they became playas. Temporary lakes fed by seasonal monsoon rains and also local groundwater that recharged during this wetter period.
Yeah.
Even if it was only, say, 100 millimeters of rain a year, that was enough.
Enough for grasses, animals, and people to move back in.
People moved back into areas that had been empty for millennia, and this greener landscape sets the stage for the first big debate we need to tackle. Cattle. Where did domesticated cattle come from in Africa?
Right. The traditional argument for a long time was that North Africa, specifically this western desert region, was one of the places cattle were first domesticated independently.
Yes, that was the model put forward by the combined prehistoric expedition based on their work at Nabta Playa and Bir Kasaiba. They argued that Bos taurus, the domestic cow, originated there during what they called the El-Adam humid interphase, maybe as early as 8800 BC.
And their reasoning was tied to the environment?
It was. Their logic was, well, this semi-arid environment was quite marginal. It couldn't support large herds of massive wild animals like wild cattle or aurochs. Therefore, the smaller boss bones they were finding must belong to smaller domesticated animals that people were carefully managing.
It sounds logical. Limited resources mean you need controlled, smaller herds.
It was a compelling argument for decades.
Hmm.
But, well, more recent work, looking closely at the ecology and re-examining the animal bones, has really challenged that.
How so? What did the newer ecological models show?
They showed that the reconstructed environment during that African humid period could actually support large, wild animals adapted to semi-arid conditions.
Like what kind of animals?
Things like oryx, addax, even elephants and hartebeest. These animals were known to live alongside wild aurochs, Bos primigenius, in the Nile Valley during the same period. So the idea that the pasture simply wasn't good enough for wild cattle, it doesn't really hold up.
So the argument, if it could support domesticates, it could support wild aurochs too, basically.
Precisely. Wild aurochs were tough animals. If the environment could sustain the smaller supposed domesticates, it could certainly sustain their larger wild ancestors.
Okay, so if the environment could support wild cattle, why weren't the early archaeologists finding lots of large wild animal bones? Was that absence proof of domestication or something else?
It looks much more likely now that it was either just the patchiness of the archaeological record, you don't always find everything, or perhaps it reflected cultural choices.
Cultural choices, like what they preferred to hunt.
Yeah, maybe. We know other groups nearby, like in the Caucasus Mountains, really focused on hunting Barbary sheep, for example. So just because you don't find lots of wild aurochs bones doesn't automatically mean people had to be domesticating cattle to survive. It might just mean they were hunting other things, or we haven't found those kill sites yet.
Okay, so the environmental argument is shaky. What about the bones themselves? Domestication usually leads to smaller animals, right? Morphology.
That's the key archaeological test. And when they reanalyzed the boss bones from those earliest phases at Nabta Playa, the El Adam and El Gorab phases, they found something crucial.
What was it?
They were too big. Their size fell comfortably within the known range for wild aurochs, Bos primigenius. They just didn't show that size reduction you expect with early domestication.
So morphologically, they looked wild.
They looked wild. It's only much later, in what's called the Ruat-El Ghanem Middle Neolithic phase, we're talking maybe 6050 to 5550 BC, that you start seeing bones that clearly fit the smaller size profile of domesticated Bos taurus.
Thousands of years later than originally proposed.
Thousands of years later. And then came the genetics.
The final nail in the coffin for the independent domestication theory.
Pretty much. Global genetic studies looking at both modern cattle breeds and ancient DNA point overwhelmingly to a single origin for Bos taurus.
And that origin wasn't Africa.
No, it was the Near East. Probably somewhere around the middle Euphrates Valley. That seems to be where wild aurochs were first domesticated.
So African cattle are descendants of that Near Eastern stock.
Largely, yes. Now, it's possible, even likely, that there was some later interbreeding, some gene flow from local African wild aurochs into those imported domestic herds, but the foundational domestic stock itself came from the Near East.
Okay, so the story shifts. It's not independent invention, it's diffusion. Ideas and animals moving across the landscape.
Exactly. It looks like a diffusionist wave coming out of the Near East, and the timing of when different domestic animals appear in Northeast Africa really supports this.
How so? What arrived first?
The first domesticates we see evidence for are sheep and goats caprines. They show up earliest at sites like Sodman Cave, over by the Red Sea coast, dated around 6200 to 6000 BC.
Okay, sheep and goats first. And cattle.
Cattle arrive later. The earliest, really solid, verifiable dates for domestic Bos taurus at Nabta Playa are around 5600 BC.
So goats and sheep first, then cattle. Why is that sequence important?
Because that two-step process, caprines first, then cattle lagging behind, is the classic pattern we see for the spread of domesticated animals out of the Near East across other regions. It strongly argues against an earlier, independent domestication of cattle within Africa.
Got it. So by the Middle Holocene, these desert communities are adopting Near Eastern animals. They're developing ways to manage them in this challenging environment.
They're becoming incredibly organized. This is where Nabta Playa gets really fascinating, beyond just the cattle debate. By the 5th millennium BC, around, say, 5000 BC onwards,
What changes?
their settlements become much more structured. We see evidence of huts built in straight rows. We find these complex pits that were clearly used for storing wild plant foods like sorghum.
Plant storage. That suggests planning ahead, right? Not just eating what you find today.
Exactly. It marks a really significant shift towards what anthropologists call a delayed return economy. You're investing labor, now harvesting, storing for a payoff later. That requires social organization, trust. It's a big step.
But the most famous feature of Nabta Playa isn't the huts or the storage pits. It's the stones.
The megaliths, yes. Nabta Playa is home to what many argue is the world's oldest known astronomical site.
Older than Stonehenge.
Considerably older. We're talking about alignments of large unworked stones and, most famously, a small stone circle, often called the calendar circle. Dates for this cluster around 4800 BC.
4800 BC, that's nearly 7,000 years ago. What were they tracking with these stones?
Well, the alignments show a sophisticated understanding of the sky. They marked the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. And crucially, some alignments point towards the approximate direction of sunrise on the summer solstice.
The summer solstice. Why would that be so important to them?
Because in that particular environment, at that time, the summer solstice sunrise heralded the coming of the monsoon rains.
Ah, the rains that filled the playa, that made life possible.
Exactly. Knowing when that rainy season was likely to start was absolutely critical for survival, for managing herds, for knowing when plant resources would become available, for planning movements. It connected the sky directly to their livelihood.
Now, I know there's some really ambitious theories about these stones tracking specific stars, like Orion's belt, or even mapping cycles over thousands of years. How solid is that?
That's where we need to be a bit cautious. Some of those theories, especially the ones proposing alignments to stars like Sirius, Arcturus, or the stars of Orion's belt, and particularly the idea that the circle mapped the sky's movement over a vast precession cycle, maybe representing stars back at 6270 BC.
Yeah.
Those rely on some dating methods and astronomical interpretations that have been heavily debated, and in some cases, the underlying calculations have been shown to have issues.
Okay, so we can't definitively say they were mapping Orion across millennia.
Probably not with certainty, but what is certain, what's undeniable, is that they were making careful, repeated observations of the sky. They were using megaliths to mark key celestial events, definitely including the cardinal points and the summer solstice sunrise.
So a sophisticated astronomical practice, even if the exact targets beyond the solstice are debated.
Absolutely. It shows this deep intellectual engagement with the cosmos, linking it directly to their earthly survival. And this focus wasn't just, practical timekeeping. It seems to have been deeply symbolic.
How do we see that symbolism?
We see it in the repetition, the orientation of the megaliths, of standing stones or stelae. Even of human burials, they often show this strong focus towards the north, towards the celestial pole, perhaps. And then there's the cattle burials.
Cattle burials, not just eating them.
No, around 5500 BC, even before the main megalithic circle, we find whole cattle buried in specially prepared chambers lined with clay, sometimes under large stone mounds.
Wow, that sounds ritualistic.
Highly ritualistic. It points clearly to an early form of a sacred cattle cult. They're connecting all their major concerns, cattle, water, death, the earth, the sun, the stars, into one symbolic system. This veneration of cattle born in the desert becomes absolutely central to later Egyptian religion and kingship.
So the desert wasn't just a place they survived in. It was where they developed this incredibly complex worldview.
It was a crucible. The harshness forced adaptation, organization, and it seems profound intellectual and symbolic leaps.
Okay, so these desert communities at places like Nabta Playa developed sophisticated subsistence, social organization, and this symbolic system focused on cattle and the cosmos. But the climate didn't stay wet forever, did it?
No, the African humid period started to wane. From the 6th millennium BC onwards, things began to dry out again. The rains became less reliable, the playas started shrinking.
And that pressure forced people to move.
It seems so. The most likely direction was eastward, towards the only permanent, reliable water source, the Nile Valley. And critically, they didn't just bring their cattle and their survival skills.
They brought their ideas, their entire intellectual package.
Exactly. This migration, driven by climate change, acts like a cultural conveyor belt, transferring these concepts developed in the desert into the Nile Valley, where they would eventually blossom into Pharaonic civilization.
How can we be sure these ideas originated in the desert and weren't developed later on the Nile? Where's the smoking gun for these desert origins?
For that, we need to look south and east of Nabta Playa, to the Gilf Kebir Plateau, specifically at the rock art sites there. The most famous are Wadi Sur I, which is known as the Cave of the Swimmers, and Wadi Sur II, the Cave of the Beasts.
And this rock art dates back to when?
We're talking late 7th and 6th millennia BC, so contemporary with or even slightly before some of the key developments we see at Nabta Playa, and definitely predating the rise of the Egyptian state along the Nile by thousands of years.
Okay, so what do these paintings show that connects to later Egypt? Let's start with Kingship, the pharaoh.
Right, the central pillar. In Wadi Thura the Surth, the cave of the swimmers, there's this small but really distinct male figure. He's painted red.
Red often signifies power or life in this kind of art, doesn't it?
It does. And crucially, he's wearing something on his head. It's a cone-like object. And it looks remarkably similar to the hedjet.
The white crown of Upper Egypt, the symbol of southern kingship in dynastic times.
Exactly. But the earliest depictions of the white crown in the Nile Valley itself only appear much later, during the Naqada I period, maybe mid-4th millennium BC. Here we potentially see it in the desert thousands of years earlier.
Okay, a crown is suggestive, but is there more?
Oh, yes. It's what the figure is doing. He's shown in this very specific pose, suggesting a kind of intensive ceremonial run.
A run, like a race.
Not just any run. It strongly evokes the Sed festival.
The Sed Festival. Remind us what that was.
The Sed festival, or Heb Sed, was maybe the most important ritual for a reigning pharaoh. It was a jubilee, typically celebrated after 30 years on the throne, although sometimes more frequently. Its purpose was to ritually rejuvenate the king.
To prove he was still fit to rule.
Precisely, to renew his magical potency, his physical strength, and reconfirm his divine right to rule. And the absolute core of the ritual involved the king performing a ceremonial run around boundary markers, symbolizing his claim over the land and his enduring vitality.
And the earliest evidence for that ritual in the Nile Valley is?
When? Around 3300 BC, maybe with King Den, but certainly solidified by the time of Djoser and the Step Pyramid. So seeing this running figure, possibly wearing a proto-white crown, in desert rock art from the 6th or 7th millennium BC.
It suggests the fundamental concept of royal renewal, of proving fitness through ritual action, originated out here with these nomadic chieftains.
It really looks like the ideological blueprint. And it's not just about renewal, it's also about the king's primary duty.
Which was?
Protecting order from chaos, maintaining Mot against Isfet in later Egyptian terms.
And we see that in the rock art, too. This must be the smiting scene people talk about.
That's the one. In Wadi Sur II, the Cave of the Beasts, there's this incredibly powerful composition. You see a dominant figure, presumably a chieftain, holding a mace, a clear symbol of authority.
Okay.
And he's standing triumphantly over another male figure who is depicted fallen, defeated, often shown upside down or smaller.
That exact scene, the ruler striking down an enemy, becomes the defining image of pharaonic power, doesn't it? It's everywhere, on palettes, temple walls.
Everywhere, from the Narmer palette right through to Roman times. It's the foundational statement of kingship. The ruler, as the one who imposes order, conquers enemies, and protects the community from the forces of chaos.
And here it is, again, seemingly fully formed in the desert millennia earlier.
It suggests that this political theology, the idea that you need a strong, divinely sanctioned leader to maintain stability, especially when facing existential threats like, say, climate change drying out your homeland.
That idea was forged in the crucible of the drying Sahara.
It seems that way. The desert conditions didn't just shape their survival strategies, they shaped their political ideology.
Wow. Okay, so we have kingship rituals, the ideology of the conquering ruler. Does this desert worldview extend to their understanding of the cosmos itself? Like creation myths?
It absolutely does. Wadi Sur II, again, there's another central, really striking composition. It shows this large composite creature painted white. It's got a female torso, you can see a breast, but it has animal-like legs.
Okay, a mythical being.
And this creature is leaning back, forming a distinct arc, like a vault. And supporting this arching figure from below is another figure, this one painted red, male, reclining, and depicted with incredibly long, almost stretched out limbs.
An arc supported by a reclining figure. That sounds familiar.
It should. It's an almost perfect visual parallel to the later Egyptian myth of the separation of earth and sky.
Nut and Geb.
Exactly. The sky goddess Nut, often shown as a woman arching over the earth, her body speckled with stars, and beneath her, the earth god Geb, reclining, sometimes depicted as trying to reach her. Often, the air god Shu is shown between them, holding them apart.
And this rock art shows that basic structure. The sky arching, supported by the earth below.
The visual schema is identical. The white arched female figure as the sky, the red reclining male figure as the earth. It strongly suggests that the fundamental Egyptian story of how the cosmos was ordered, a separation of sky and earth, originated with these desert people. They were already mapping out their universe in these terms.
That's incredible. What about the afterlife? Did they have ideas about what happens after death? We mentioned the cattle burials.
Yes, and the rock art adds more layers. Think back to Wadi Sur the Surt, the Cave of the Swimmers. Those figures.
They're not just paddling around.
The interpretation is that they represent the souls of the dead. They're shown floating, often in an arc or curved line, within what's thought to represent the primordial waters.
The waters of Nun, the primeval ocean from Egyptian myth.
Precisely. None. The watery abyss that existed before creation and where souls were believed to return and potentially be reborn from. Later Egyptian texts, like the coffin texts, describe resurrection rituals taking place within Nun. This rock art seems to be an incredibly early depiction of that core concept, the soul's journey through these primordial waters after death.
But was entry into this afterlife automatic? Or were there conditions?
This is where it gets really interesting, suggesting the emergence of ethical ideas. In Wadi Sur II, there are these scenes with creatures described as headless beasts. They might be baboons or some other mythical creature. And these beasts are shown attacking or seemingly devouring human figures.
Sounds ominous. Guardians of the underworld.
That's the interpretation. They're seen as guardians at the entrance to the netherworld. And the implication is that they aren't just random monsters, they're gatekeepers. They only allow passage to those who meet certain qualifying criteria.
Qualifying criteria. Like,
Yeah.
you had to be worthy.
Exactly. It suggests the beginnings of a moral or ethical dimension to the afterlife. You couldn't just die. You had to have lived according to the community's norms, perhaps shown respect, fulfilled obligations, essentially lived in accordance with the early principles of ma'at, or social order and justice.
So the rock art isn't just myth, it's also enforcing social rules, an ethical code for entry into the afterlife.
It seems to function as both. It outlines the cosmos, the afterlife journey, and reinforces the social behaviors needed to navigate it successfully.
And speaking of social order, is there anything about how that order was passed down, like family, inheritance?
There's one more key scene, again in Wadi Sur II, that speaks to that. It depicts what looks like a family unit. There's an adult male figure holding a mace.
Symbol of authority again.
Right. And an adult female figure holding a basket, perhaps adjusting her role in gathering, storage, domestic economy. And then, crucially, there's a child figure shown connected to the woman by what really looks like an umbilical cord.
An umbilical cord, wow.
It's interpreted as possibly the earliest known iconographic representation of the hereditary principle. It visually connects the child, the next generation, directly to the established parental figures and their roles. It's a way of legitimizing lineage, succession, and the passing down of status or roles within this increasingly complex society.
So all the key elements are there. Kingship, cosmic order, afterlife beliefs, ethical rules, even hereditary succession. All seemingly sketched out in the desert rock art.
The intellectual toolkit for the pharaonic state seems to have been largely assembled out there under the pressures of that changing environment.
Okay, so we followed this incredible intellectual journey from survival adaptations at Nabta Playa, leading to complex cosmology and political ideology captured in the Gilf Kebir rock art. And this whole package, you argue, migrated east to the Nile. That package must have also included ideas about healing, right? Egypt became famous for its doctors.
Absolutely. But Egyptian medicine, the kind we read about in the papyri, with diagnoses and treatments, didn't just appear out of nowhere when the state formed. It evolved, and its earliest roots are, again, probably tied to these pre-dynastic desert cultures and their Nile Valley contemporaries, the Nabta culture.
So before the formal state, before the pharaohs, say between 4500 and 3100 BC, what did healing look like then?
At that stage, it was deeply embedded in a spiritual worldview. Think shamanism. Disease wasn't necessarily seen as a biological process.
It's caused by bad spirits.
Pretty much. Malign spirits, angry ancestors, displeased deities. That was the perceived cause of illness. So the healer was the shaman, the spiritual leader who could mediate with that supernatural world.
How did they do that?
Well, techniques probably involved entering trance states, maybe using chanting, drumming, or psychoactive plants, though evidence for the latter is debated. They often believed they were guided by animal spirit helpers. Interestingly, birds seem prominent.
Birds?
Yes, like the ibis, which is fascinating because the ibis later becomes the sacred animal of Thoth.
Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and medicine.
Exactly. So you see this potential link, this continuity from the shaman's bird spirit helper to the later god of medicine.
But was it all spirits and trances? Was there any practical, hands-on healing happening.
Oh, definitely. Even within that magical framework, people learned through observation and necessity. We have archaeological evidence from the pre-dynastic Naqada sites showing, for example, bones that were broken but healed remarkably well,
Suggesting someone set them.
suggesting they knew how to set fractures using splints, probably made from wood or reeds and padding. That's empirical knowledge. We also see evidence they were using things like malachite powder.
That green mineral.
Yes, it contains copper salts, which actually do have some antiseptic properties. They seem to have used it for eye ailments, which were likely common due to dust and flies. So you have this blend, shamanic rituals dealing with the ultimate spiritual cause, combined with practical treatments for the symptom.
Okay, so shamanism with some empirical knowledge. Then Egypt unifies. The dynastic period begins around 3100 BC. Does the shaman just disappear?
Not entirely, but the role transforms and becomes more specialized within the structure of the new state and its powerful priesthoods. The first clear evolution we see is the emergence of the Sem priest,
Sem priest. When were they active?
primarily during the first three dynasties. And interestingly, they kept some of the old shamanic visual cues that are often depicted wearing a leopard skin, a traditional symbol of power and passage between worlds.
But their function changed. What was their focus regarding health?
Their focus seems to have been very specific: the king's health and the purity of the royal environment. They weren't general practitioners for everyone. They were more like royal public health officers.
So making sure the king's food was safe, his water pure, overseeing hygiene in the palace.
Exactly. Ensuring the king's physical well-being, managing nutrition, preventing illness through hygiene. It was about maintaining the health of the divine ruler, which was crucial for the state. They also had other important roles, like overseeing state expeditions for resources like copper.
Okay, so specialized preventative care for the king. What comes next?
The next key figure is the lector priest, emerging around the Second Dynasty, say 2890 BC onwards. Now, they still practice some magical healing incantations, amulets linking back to the older traditions, but their main role was different and crucial for the development of medicine.
No, so.
They were the readers. They were the literate priests associated with a very important institution called the Per-Ankh, the House of Life.
The House of Life, that sounds important. Was it like a temple? A library?
It was more than just a library, though it certainly had that function. Houses of life were attached to major temples, and they served as scriptoriums, places where texts were studied, copied, and composed. They held sacred texts, religious philosophy, mathematical treatises, magical spells,
In medical texts.
and medical texts. This is where the medical papyri we know about, like the Edwin Smith or Ebers papyri, were likely written, stored, and studied. The House of Life was the intellectual hub, the university, the research institute, all rolled into one, tightly connected to the temple and the state.
So the lector priests, being literate, were the ones who could access and work with this written medical knowledge.
Precisely. This marks a massive shift. Healing knowledge is no longer just passed down orally or through individual shamanic experience. It's becoming codified, written down, standardized. The lector priests are the custodians and disseminators of this growing body of medical literature.
Okay, so we have the Sem priests for royal hygiene and lector priests managing written medical knowledge. But neither sounds quite like a doctor in our sense, focused on diagnosing and treating illness in the wider community. Where does that role come from?
That seems to crystallize a bit later, driven by another major shift, this time both religious and, weirdly enough, related to public health policy. This happens around the 4th and 5th dynasties.
What was this shift?
Religiously, during the 4th dynasty, that's the era of the Great Pyramids, 2613, 2494 BC, the sun god Ra really rises to supreme prominence. The king starts being called Son of Ra. Ra becomes the top god.
Okay, and how does worshiping Ra lead to doctors?
Well, worshipping Ra involved massive state-sponsored festivals, and these festivals required huge numbers of animal sacrifices to feed the gods and, significantly, to feed the populace who attended these events, especially bulls.
Mass sacrifices mean lots of meat.
Lots and lots of meat being prepared and distributed, often in crowded festival settings, and that immediately creates a potential public health nightmare in a pre-refrigeration society.
Food poisoning. Disease spreading from animal.
Exactly. The state needed a way to ensure this sacrificial meat was safe to eat. And this necessity, it's argued, led directly to the rise of a new, highly specialized group of priests in the 5th dynasty, around 2494-200-345 BC. The priests of Sekhmet.
Sekhmet. The lioness goddess. Wasn't she the goddess of plague and destruction?
She was. Sekhmet had this fierce duality. She could bring pestilence and disease, often depicted breathing plagues. But because of that power over illness, she also became a goddess of healing. Her priests were the ones who could appease her, ward off plagues, and heal the sick. And crucially, their specific state-mandated job was meat inspection.
So the priests of the goddess of plague became the first food safety inspectors.
Essentially, yes. Their primary official duty was to examine the bulls sacrificed at these mass festivals, checking the meat for signs of disease or spoilage before it was given out to the people.
And this act of inspecting animal carcasses, that's seen as the origin point for doctors.
It's seen as a critical step, because through this regular, systematic inspection, they would have gained intimate knowledge of animal anatomy, pathology, what diseased organs looked like. And crucially, it represents perhaps the first institutional recognition that disease could potentially pass from animals to humans. It connects animal health directly to the risk of human epidemics.
Wow. So they learned practical anatomy and pathology from their inspection duties.
Yes, and they combined that hands-on knowledge with the theoretical knowledge stored in the medical papyri at the House of Life, which they, as priests, would also have had access to. This fusion of practical experience and textual learning is what positions the priests of Sekhmet as the likely origin point for professional physicians, or sunu, as they were called.
So they were doing their official inspection duties, but also likely treating people on the side.
That seems to be the case. Their expertise in identifying disease, learned through inspection, combined with their access to medical texts and their association with the goddess of healing, made them the go-to experts for curative medicine within the wider community, not just the palace. They also became known specifically as bone setters, perhaps linking back to that Sekhmet association with fierce power.
And we actually know the names of some of these very early physicians.
We do, which really highlights the status this profession achieved quite early on. There's Hesi-Ra from the 3rd dynasty, around 2650 BC. His tomb inscription gives him the title Chief of Dentists and Physicians.
Chief of Dentists and Physicians. So specialization was already happening.
It seems so. While we don't know exactly what cures Hesi-Ra performed, his title alone shows that medicine was a recognized high-status profession early in the Old Kingdom.
But is there someone we know actually did something curative, like the first documented case?
Yes, that distinction seems to belong to a physician named Nyank Sekhmet. Fittingly, a priest associated with Sekhmet.
When did he live?
He lived during the 5th dynasty, around 2487 BC, and his tomb contains an inscription that's remarkably specific. It documents that he successfully treated the king for a nosebleed.
A nosebleed. It might sound minor to us, but it's a documented medical intervention.
It's a specific, recorded curative act performed by a named physician on the ruler. And proponents of Egyptian primacy claim this documented procedure predates the earliest comparable evidence for named doctors performing cures in Mesopotamia by about 400 years.
So, a plausible claim for Egypt being the birthplace of documented professional medicine, evolving out of this unique path from shamanism through priestly specialization and public health necessity.
It's a compelling trajectory linking back ultimately to the need for order and specialized roles that seems to have been first conceptualized out in the desert. #tag outro.
What an incredible journey we've taken. We really have traced this massive intellectual arc.
We started way out in the Western Desert, back when it was green. We saw how the basic needs of survival, managing water, maybe managing cattle herds at Nabta Playa, led these communities to develop surprisingly complex social structures and this deep focus on the sky, on astronomy.
Right, the calendar circle, the cattle cult.
Yeah.
Foundations laid out there.
Then, as the climate changed, as the desert started to dry out again, these people and their ideas moved eastward.
And we saw those ideas surface again vividly in the Gilf Kabir rock art.
Exactly. The blueprints for kingship, that running chieftain, the smiting scene, the blueprints for their cosmos, the sky goddess arching over the earth god, ideas about the afterlife, ethics, even hereditary succession, all sketched out on those cave walls.
It's like the desert acted as an incubator for the core software of Egyptian civilization.
That's a great way to put it. An incubator driven by the intense pressure of environmental change and scarcity, and then that whole intellectual package gets transferred to the Nile Valley.
Where it provides the framework for the pharaonic state. And within that state, we see the evolution of healing.
From the shaman dealing with spirits, to the specialized sem-priests managing royal hygiene, then the lector priests codifying medical knowledge in the House of Life.
Culminating in the priests of Sekhmet. The meat inspectors turned public health officials turned, arguably, the world's first professional doctors, like Nyack Sekhmet healing the king's nosebleed.
It's a remarkably coherent story showing how these complex ideas about the cosmos, society, and even the body evolved and were passed down.
The key takeaway, then, is that the Western Desert wasn't just some empty wasteland waiting for Nile's civilization to spill into it. It was actively shaping the foundational concepts.
It was the source. The intense challenges of desert life seem to have forced these intellectual leaps, detailed astronomy, powerful political myths, early public health thinking. These weren't born from the Nile's predictable abundance, but from the desert's demanding scarcity.
Which leads to a really provocative final thought, doesn't it?
I think so. If the very foundations of one of humanity's longest-lasting and most influential civilizations, its cosmology, its political structure, its earliest science were forged during a period of intense climate stress, environmental deterioration, and forced migration.
What does that say about our own time?
Well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we face our own era of profound environmental instability, resource pressures, and potential displacement, what foundational ideas are being shaped right now, perhaps out of sight, perhaps under duress? What new political myths, what new ethical frameworks, what new ways of understanding our world and our place in it are being forged in today's crucible that might define the civilizations of the future?
That is definitely something to think about. A powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest innovations come from the greatest challenges. Thank you for guiding us through that deep dive.
My pleasure. It's a history that really reshapes our perspective.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.